Today I'm going to be showing you how to do a provisional cast on. And with a provisional cast on, it's typically used in projects that you want to have live stitches at the end, so that way you can graft them together. So it's used a lot in socks and cowls. I used it in my Melissa headband, which is a free pattern available for download. You can find the link in the description. So there are many different techniques to doing a provisional cast on. This is just one of the techniques that I prefer to do. There's many different techniques to do it. So if you don't feel comfortable doing this one, you can always pick a different technique to do. So let's get right into showing you how to do a provisional cast on. To do a provisional cast on with a crochet hook, you'll need a few things first. First, you'll need your crochet hook. You want one about the same size as your knitting needle. You'll need one of your needles. You'll need scrap yarn, and you will need your working yarn. So to start, you will take your scrap yarn and make a slip knot. Then you will put that onto your crochet hook. Then take your knitting needle, put the working side of the yarn behind the knitting needle, go around the front, pull through and make a chain stitch with your crochet hook. Then you want to bring your yarn around the back, grab with your crochet hook over the front of your stitch, do another chain stitch. You'll have two stitches now, and then you'll once again go around the back, through the front, pull, chain, bring the yarn through the back, go across the front with your crochet hook to grab, around the back, and you'll continue in this method. You want to make sure that you're going around the back each time, that you're pulling your yarn, not across the front like this, but you want to go around the back towards the crochet hook side, and you will continue onward. This pattern for me right now requires 25 provisional cast on, and we just create them all in the same method of yarn over. Well, bring your yarn to the back, bring your hook in front of your needle, yarn over, and do a chain stitch. Once you have all of your stitches, I like to just chain a few chains past my stitches just to make it a little bit easier when removing the provisional cast on to be able to do so. So now that I've chain sewn, I'm gonna widen the slip knot and slip my yarn through to create the knot so that it doesn't come undone while I'm knitting. But when I tighten the knot, I don't want to tighten it too much. I want to still leave it a little bit loose, that way it's easier to pick out when I'm done. Now set your waste yarn to the side and take your working yarn and your other knitting needle. And now we will start working with our actual yarn that we want for our project. We'll start working directly into those stitches. So the first 5 of this pattern that I'm doing for this swatch is knitting 5, so I'm just going to loop the yarn on and start knitting directly into those stitches, not tying the working yarn to the scrap yarn, just keeping it as a long tail, so that way I can weave it in later. When I remove the provisional cast on later, these stitches will be live, which will allow me to graft the pieces together. So I will continue knitting and I will be back when it is finished. So now that I have my swatch done, it is time to remove the provisional cast on the bottom. I'll be placing those stitches onto the knitting needle so that way I can graft them after. So I'm going to start by taking out the knot that we left in earlier. This is why it's good to leave a looser knot and not pull it very tight. After I remove the knot, I will undo the chain,
Makes it a little bit easier having a longer chain so it's not just the first stitch. So now with the knitting needle, I will slide the stitch onto with the first of the working yarn. I will pull that out, pull the provisional cast on out, slide my stitch onto the needle as I'm pulling out the waste yarn. That way I can keep it live and I won't drop it. You want to be careful not to drop your stitches here because you can easily do that. And so I'll just continue working, pulling one chain out at a time and then sliding that stitch onto the needle before moving to the next. Slide it out. Put the stitch on the needle, undo the chain, put the stitch on the needle. This is why it's really useful to have a longer chain so that way you have more yarn to work with and pull from and you're not directly pulling just right at the live stitches. And we'll just continue pulling out one chain at a time and sliding the needle back on, sliding the stitch back onto the needle. Just pulling out one chain. And you don't want to go too fast, you don't want to pull out too many stitches at once because you can drop them. Now right here is where I started purling into the swatch, into the stitches. So this is a purl stitch going from knit. And when that happens, it tends to cross to make a loop over with the provisional yarn. So just pull it out, just gently tug a little bit to get it loose, put your stitch on, and then just pull the yarn out. It can slow down putting the stitches back on, but it's very easy to remove from. And because this part is the seed stitch, every time you flip between knitting and purling, you're going to get that sort of wrap around, and that's based on how you're going into the stitches and how the yarn is being held. And that's just, it's unavoidable when you're switching between the two using this method. So just go slowly, pulling that little loop up and pulling it out very carefully while you're removing your provisional cast on. Can be when you're doing something like seed stitch or ribbing or anything that you're switching between the two, it can be a little bit of a pain to undo it, but just take your time, go slowly, and it will be a little bit easier as you go. And now that we've gone to the purling section, it's a little bit easier. You want to make sure while you're putting your stitches on that you're loading them all the same. So you want the front leg of the stitch and the back leg of the stitch to be on the same direction. So if the first part of the stitch is forward on the needle and the second part is back, you want that to be the same on all of the stitches, regardless of whether they're knit or purl. So here we're coming to the end. It's very important to count your stitches because it's easy to lose them, and it's easy for that last one to try to act like it's not a stitch. So you want to make sure you count and have them all done. Now I have 25 back on there. There are now 25 live stitches, and I'm ready to graft it onto together with this other swatch.
And that's how we do our provisional cast on. So there are many different techniques. You choose one that works well for you, but I would practice a few different ones just to learn some basics. It'll help you when you need to do knitting that's, either toe up socks, use as a provisional cast on a lot, so do cowls. Sometimes seamless headbands will as well. So it really helps to get that technique down. So thank you and happy knitting.